I think reflecting back on President Trump's pretty remarkable visit to Saudi Arabia, it's a timely reminder for the Chinese foreign policy establishment that the GCC, particularly Saudi Arabia, still places strong value on its relationship with the United States and in many sectors prefers American cooperation. But Saudi officials have been quite clear they are not choosing between Washington and Beijing. Instead, they see both relationships as essential, albeit for different purposes. Saudi Arabia's leadership has deliberately pursued a diversification strategy to avoid over reliance on either the US or China, and to better navigate those relationships in a more multipolar world. And so far, Riyadh has managed to accommodate both US and Chinese interests, leveraging its strategic and economic weight to resist pressure from either side, whether the US or from China. Economically, the kingdom has also embedded itself into both the US and Chinese economies through the use of vast investment through PIF, through other sovereign wealth and private companies to link its domestic development to that of the US and to the Chinese economies. And this hedging strategy gives Saudi Arabia a significant degree of flexibility and optionality in how it goes about developing its economy. But it also exposes itself to greater risks as the US China rivalry intensifies, as we've seen most recently with the spat over US China tariff increases. But this new deal will be seen in Washington as a landmark moment in the bilateral Saudi US relationship and a pointed counter to China's high-profile debut in Riyadh in 2022. If you think back, President Xi's visit in 2022 was wrapped in very similar symbolism and grandeur and was accompanied by a whopping $50 billion in investment pledges and cooperation agreements. That figure was very important for China because it did provide a legitimacy boost to Beijing, who is relatively new in its engagements with the Middle East. However, the figure 50 billion now looks quite modest. When we think about it, it's just a tenth of the 500 billion that Washington and Riyadh have now agreed to. And this will be seen by many in Washington as a win. Technology remains a key fault line in many of the uh, agreements moving forward between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Riyadh is keen for deeper access to advanced U.S. technologies, particularly microchips, semiconductors, and defense systems. These are goods it cannot source from China in the same way they can source them from the U.S. But many of the current restrictions are designed not only to safeguard U.S. national security, technologies, and supply chains, but to prevent Chinese access to the sensitive technologies. And while Trump may entertain lifting some of these regulatory barriers, doing so may provoke a level of backlash in Congress, especially from those lawmakers who are intent on curbing Chinese tech ambitions. We saw in the last few years with the attempt to establish, a UAE G42 deal with major tech companies in the US, that the issue of microchips and insulating US supply chains and critical technologies was a major political sensitivity and provoked a significant degree of backlash in among US lawmakers in Congress. So in a worst case scenario, we could potentially see Congress introduce new export controls or target Gulf companies that choose to maintain close technology ties with China, rather than divesting and focusing more heavily on these new opportunities with the US. So this will be something to continue watching moving forward as we see investment commitments from the US Saudi Investment Forum move into practice and implementation.